1 Eastern. So.
All right. Alex, do you want to start us off, or do you want Russ to start us off? It's really kind of up to you guys.
However you want to do it, Alex.
Yeah, go ahead, Russ.
Okay. Maybe, oh yeah, okay.
So everybody, just so you're aware, we're going to have Russ and Alex both give sort of like a 5-minute, like lightning kind of talk to get us started off today.
There we go. All right, y'all seeing this? Okay, I'm just going to run through this real quick. So this session, of course, is looking at some of the different applications of these advanced fire models. And here I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are thinking that these things can be used to help us with firefighter training. And as you can see, most of my partners on this stuff are at the University of Montana. But of course, we've got Ruddy Mel and Rod Lynn are modelers, and Kevin Hires, everybody knows from Tall Timbers and USGS. Anyway, let me jump into this real quick. So we have this problem that our training is generally out of date and slow to change. And, we're kind of dealing with these older materials that are just not that effective in engaging people. So for example, this question here is in the current S490 course pre-work. And the question that goes with that picture is this. And here's the answer. Anyhow, so of course, outside of firefighter training, other people have gone far down the path of totally different training environments. And in fact, virtual reality is widely used in military and industrial settings. And really what this is intended to do is provide an immersive experience that gets past the abstraction and allows people to engage with the situation. This is particularly important in dynamic situations where things are in flux a lot, like fire. So we're excited about those possibilities. So I've been really lucky to work with Matt Gibson. He was a interagency hotshot for 17 years, and now he's a training specialist at the Northern Rockies Training Center. And here I'm just going to showcase some of the innovative stuff he's been doing along these lines. So first, you'll see him appear as an avatar in a 3D environment. That's not what he really looks like. Here you're seeing him shoot some stuff with his mouse or handset that is simple interactive fire simulation. Here's using a 3D camera setup to capture spherical photos of hazard trees, which is then used for training folks in hazard tree identification, in which they can be in that scene, in the real world scene. You can see that's a pretty serious broken top. He's demonstrating an interactive 3D environment, and he's spawning objects, in this case, a tree, and then moving it around in the scene to make a specific configuration for training folks on chainsaw hazard and chainsaw techniques. So you can see that these trees are 3D objects that you can bring into the scene. Then he is illustrating how using the VR, which is a very interactive thing with handsets and goggles, you can pick up this virtual chainsaw and decide how you're going to, position it on the tree. So this, as you know, cutting trees and falling trees are a really serious hazard in the whole fire business. And we're really interested in making this as immersive and realistic as possible. So here he's demonstrating some game engine physics used in tree felling. Here's another approach he's been looking at. I should explain, if you're confused by the 2-screen thing, that's how you get 3D vision. So if you're looking at it just flat screen without the goggles, it appears as 2 views. Here's another concept he's been working on, which has been very well met in terms of initial testing with folks. It's about interactive briefing in a 3D environment with folks for fire incidents. So in this case, the avatars that you see there are all him on his various computers, but you can see that you could have other people in this multiplayer environment, essentially interacting, talking with each other, and you can have very realistic effects like this, these kind of assets. Let me move on. So this is another thing to show you is this 3D training that we're developing, prototype training using VR. So first you'll see a fire simulation. This is being carried out with the WFDS model developed by Ruddy Mel and the NIST folks. You're seeing, the fire is moving through the scene. There's 3D fuels, complex terrain. You can see the smoke. So Smoke View is a visualization package that works with FDS and WFDS and enables you to, get your simulation output and immediately see what happened. And there's all sorts of ways you can visualize the data. This is that same simulation with the output ported into the Unity game engine with a VR connection. So in this case, for a firefighter, they can walk through the scene, they can look around, and here the fire behavior that you're seeing is coming from the physics-based fire model, but it's being translated into more compelling visual effects. But the location and the heat and all that are coming from the 3D physics-based fire model. So these trees are coming from our fast fuels platform, which we're developing for wall-to-wall 3D fuels data for advanced models. We hope that that'll be something we can build out and use this kind of VR training in a broad sense. So anyway, I think that might be it for me. Yeah, that's it. Happy to take any questions. I can't hear anybody else talking though.
Honestly, I got to think about this for a little bit because I
Can you hear
saw
me
this
now?
yesterday. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think this is really cool. And yeah, I need to think about it for a little bit. Somebody else has a question or something, but I can totally see like all kinds of different sort of modeling links, to this, like the email thread that we had, Russ,
Right.
with like Landis and everything. Like, I feel like that could even kind of fit into this,
Totally.
So,
Yeah.
So yeah, like my mind is kind of racing all over the place, right? Where I'm like, oh, I could link to that. I could go to that,
Well, the
So,
thing
yeah.
I think that this does, having the VR connection means that people can do a walkthrough, right? So let's say you have you have your current forest out there, and this could be fed by the best data. You got your LiDAR, you got your, in this
Mhm.
case, you would be representing the LiDAR trees with these 3D objects. So they're really realistic, right? And you could break those out by species, and like, there's actually trees out there that have already been developed that you can just access that are like photorealistic. Okay, so particularly, it gets costly from a computational point of view, if you get into all those polygons, right? So that's why we're using those kind of cartoony trees in this demo. But you can totally create an environment in which people can see and walk through it, and it really feels very real. And you can imagine that in terms of communicating, different fuel treatment alternatives or potential outcomes from, different management approaches, or, run our simulations of fire of different cases and say, what kind of fire do you want to see go through here? I think it could be really important in getting our stakeholders kind of on the same page about what they want to see come out of fuels management, et cetera. Sorry to go on and on.
No.
Russ, have you connected already with the folks at NIST? I think Nick, you know who this is, who are doing like full 360 attempts at videoing fire passage. Is it Matt Holler?
Oh, I have
Oh, yeah, Matt.
talked to that guy at one point. Yeah.
Okay.
It has been a while, but yeah, that's super cool. I love that idea.
Well, what I'm thinking is if he's willing to like build up a library, it'd be really interesting to like add this to that virtual reality environment of like, okay, how do you expect this space to burn? And then be there and be able to look around and think about it and work with it. The other thing I'm going to put a plug in for is sound. I think that
Oh yeah, we want to work on that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to help, or I'm happy to not help if you don't want me around on that. But I think that we get a lot of information from the sound of fire that we forget about when we're not around it.
No, I would be delighted to have your help on that because I know that's a theme you've been working on. And yeah, that's an extraordinary way to add additional realism to this. So I just noticed a question from Addie. She says, do you think VR training would put smaller departments and stations at a disadvantage because of access to the right technology? And I would say that would have been much more of a concern, like even like last year. But now you can get these self-contained VR headsets for like $200. The one that we are gearing up for this to be working on is called the Oculus Quest 2. So previous VR systems had the goggles hardwired with a big cable to typically a really powerful gaming computer would be what you'd have with a serious graphics card. That would be a cost entry point of around $2,000 typically. But this new thing, the Oculus Quest 2, is a self-contained thing. There's no computer beyond the headset. The headset is the computer, and you can buy it right now for like $250 or something. So it is truly an immersive experience to get into this thing. And we think that if we can make this where the content can be experienced in a cheap platform like that. The other access point here that's really cheap is something like Google Cardboard, which is like almost free thing that you put your cell phone in and it translates those the split screen thing to a 3D view. So that's another way that the cost point would not be a problem, we think.
Hey, before we get to, yeah, I agree, Russ. That's a really good answer to that question. Before we get too far down the fire science rabbit hole or this side of the rabbit hole, why don't we give Alex a chance to talk so we can tie in the rest of our folks.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. I don't want it to be forced.
Hey everyone. So yeah, like Nick had said, Alex and we did a session on Tuesday and called this wildfire simulation under climate change. We had a set of 9 really good speakers, and I'm going to go through just a really brief recap of that session and let you know who's online right now, so that we can, if you want to ask questions of those speakers. And I kind of one thing that I'm interested in discussing later or throughout this session is just where are some overlaps to kind of bridge this really fine scale like VR. I was looking at some of the talks in the CFA session, and you're working on scales of centimeters. And to us in our session, we're looking at these broad scales, really broad scale, where like 270 meter pixel is considered fine scale. And so there's kind of that huge disconnect in a spatial scale and the time scale where it's really, a lot of the climate change people. In our session, we're talking about broad temporal spatial patterns versus these really specific designed to run and simulate a prescribed fire and simulate the smoke and the flame and heat transfer throughout a canopy. So just what are some commonalities to kind of bridge that gap, to talk on the same page is just one thing I was thinking about there. So in the circle today, we'll have a couple of people that talked about using the FSIM model to develop a few different approaches to look at climate change by the mid and end century. And that's Carleen Hay from Risk. She'll be coming on in a few minutes if you saw her talk. And then myself. These are both just different GCM approaches to summarize climate change impacts on fire spread, and we're talking like really fine scale or really broad scale compared to what the CFA group is working with. John won't be on the circle today, but he's been looking deeply into how much does bias in various global climate models affect our understanding and output of fire spread. Then we'll have Yang from Baylor. She's here on the call today, looking at a different model, LPJ, and predicting emissions in the future, projecting emissions in the future based on that, and coupling it with a lightning emission model. So I think there could be some overlap there to discuss with some of the lightning and emission stuff with smoke modeling, if there is a way to bridge that scale gap. Karen's on the call today. I know a lot of you have worked with Karen before, and Karen has been doing and presented on this on Tuesday. Carbon risk calculation using forest inventory and analysis data set, and also looking at carbon emissions and trying to project those into the future, along with changes in vegetation and changes in wildfire. Then we have Sihan Lee from Oxford. It's probably really early in the morning for you, but she's on the call for today, at least until about 9. Sihan presented some of these different characteristics of wind fire regimes in Brazil. And so I was going to put a plug for discussing how that some of the wind, fire, smoke, spatial patterns, how that could maybe relate to some of the fine scale fire or smoke modeling spread that was presented in the Wednesday morning session. So that's that, and it's a cool perspective from a different region that is a little bit separate from a lot of the conterminous US heavy stuff that we've seen in both of these sessions. And then Pang is also on here. Pang's worked with Kevin Hires doing some large scale assessment, statistical projections of fire probability using a different sort of GCM based model by mid-century. And so that's the people on board, and just a summary of what we discussed on Tuesday morning. And yeah, again, if there's some sort of overlap where we can kind of look into think about what do these results mean for the CFA people and vice versa, that'd be something I'm interested in discussing today. And I think any of these people from our session that are on are available and willing to dive deeper into their stuff if a question does come up directed to one of those specific projects. So I'll go ahead and stop my share. And
wow, what a cool set of stuff in that session, Alex. That's awesome.
I wanted to offer a thought to what you said, Russ, which is, I think even when I got my very first paper published, I was really excited to see it come out in a journal, and then you're kind of like, ta-da! And a lot of times not much happens, right? And you get the feeling that there's maybe 3 people that want to read it and are really interested in it in the whole world, or, you know, if you're lucky, maybe 50. And I love seeing what you're doing, Russ, with taking this technology and this really cool modeling and getting it into the hands of people who can use it. That's really exciting to me to see that. And I kind of wanted to, did anyone else see Mo Essen's talk yesterday? She was talking about, it was specifically risk modeling, but it would apply to some of these other models potentially too. She's a social scientist, and she was talking about that there are barriers and people being able to really use a lot of this work on the ground. And she was discussing some of that from this really interesting context, and how a lot of times, at least in our risk modeling world, there's this kind of one-way vector where the scientists, where we busily produce all of this stuff in our offices, and then we kind of offer it to people. We say, hey, look what I made you, isn't it great? And we hope the public gets really excited, and that there's various reasons that doesn't happen sometimes, or various reasons to people actually uptaking it in their ability to reduce risk. So I don't know if that's a place we need to go with this discussion right now, but I just wanted to offer that and say good on you, Russ, for handing it to people who can reduce their risk and seem really excited about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergy in the kind of things that we're seeing in this conference. And for me, one of the things that it gets me the most excited is connecting the dots between different things and seeing the new things that come out of those connections, So, I think I'd love to see an intersection of the kind of stuff that was going on in your session, Alex, with the kind of stuff that we've been talking about. And I know that the scale challenges are considerable, but I think there's just as an interesting idea, it'd be cool, since we're now able to take these models from, model output from CFD models and put it into VR. It'd be really cool to just show people what some of those climate models do in that environment. I'm sure somebody else has already done that out there, but I don't know. There's so much going on with all that. I'm going to be quiet now because I'm just babbling.
I saw you shaking your head, Karen. So to nobody has done that before, I think is what you were shaking your head to, right?
Yeah, not that I know of. And of course, we're working at kind of coarser scales, Russ. So I don't think we really have outputs in the same way you do to show people what that fire might be like. But we certainly could feed you some weather streams and fuel moistures and things like that from this project.
I think one of the things that I like about this VR thing is that it does make complex things something that is tractable for people. Like, they don't have to necessarily understand all the why how things do stuff, but seeing it in action, I think is really powerful. So like, if you're interested, I could show you 2 more slides that kind of illustrate some of this, the capability that we can use visualization in these kind of setups, if you're willing. People want to see that? Okay, hold on. Okay, just a second. Okay, so I showed this in my talk yesterday on the training, but this is, again, output from WFDS. And these are streamlines that show the kind of convergence or channeling of the wind by the topography, okay? And what you'll see is as the fire enters the scene, the heat-induced buoyancy, starts to take over. So this is a really exciting visualization for me, because people are always talking about fire atmosphere interactions, but for me, this one really captures it. Like, you really see those counter rotating vortices coming out of the convective processes, like this is something that people are used to seeing, the swirls of smoke, but somehow the streamlines showing the channeling and, the ambient wind getting dominated by the fire. It's a concept that they can only talk about vaguely, but this kind of thing gets them, closer to seeing that. And this next one is just illustrating, Rod and I, some time back, were doing some work with this calculation of a thing called thermal dosage. And this is shown within the VR again, actually, from two perspectives, an overhead and a oblique. And what you see, let me do that again, is that this is a receptor that is basically calculating exposure, okay, in this thermal dosage kind of experimental measure, okay, and it gets hot, it changes color as its exposure goes up, okay, and this illustrates the power of these models to kind of help us think about firefighter safety in a totally different way. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that. It's kind of cool.
So Russ, what fire models are being used in those? Like
this is WFDS.
Is it
yeah.
okay? Okay.
But yeah, we did a similar calculation with Rod's model. We just I haven't got around to publishing that.
Yeah.
So then, Russ, is the idea like going to the modeling side of things, since it's kind of our, I think, one of our focuses for the conversation. And I think Kevin brought it up at the beginning in the chat, talking about canonical tests, but then I'm going to reuse that word in a different way. What would be the sort of like the canonical examples in here? I think one of the things that just causes me a little pause is that the particular models we're looking at here don't account for larger meso and synoptic scale flow, which really is a hazard and a concern in the context of training. So I'm wondering how that could be like captured as well.
Well, I think that's an incredibly important development that has to happen, and I know you've explored that, right? I think you've worked through some of that.
A bit, but yeah, there's like a whole suite. Like Brian Potter comes to mind as a really good resource here in the concept of like the synoptic scale flows.
Yeah. Well, I think that connection is really important to make, and probably the WRF model, folks, like you've worked with that model a lot. I think that's one of those things that gets into that realm, because you have that, the direct connection to, dynamic climate modeling or weather modeling, right? So yeah, I think that first of all, that just the concepts of meteorology in general are complex, and any way we can make that more intuitive for managers so they can grasp the concepts and see it would be a huge score, right? So like similarly to what we're doing here with this fine scale modeling, if we were to apply a similar approach with WRF or some other setup that can capture those big synoptic influences, which are obviously totally critical, and are hard to explain, like I think of it being a substantial challenge. I mean, obviously meteorology is a very complex field, so it's not like you're going to get it all on the back of a 3x5 card, right?
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I think there'd be a huge benefit to being able to illustrate those processes and just like show what do these different cases do. Like I think maybe you were leaning towards having like a library of common scenarios, and what do they entail, and what are the kind of repercussions of those, maybe?
Yeah, and so thinking so Marcus Williams on Tuesday in the session that Louise moderated was presenting on mountain waves, right, and the influence of mountain waves. Or we could think about other frontal passage. And so what comes to mind is something thinking about like, here's this space in a stable environment, and then here's what it would look like. Here's how the fire might change. Do we have the technology to be able to say that? I don't know if we have mountain wave passage or frontal passage, right? So to help people visualize what that does to the fire environment. But I think that the question is, we know that it's important, but do we actually know how to model that?
Mhm.
So we need Marcus on. He would be a fantastic addition to this conversation. But
Is that something that Wind Ninja might do?
no, Wind Ninja does not have the resolution. So we're talking about things that need to be up to like the troposphere, right? Things
Okay.
that can capture that larger scale flow. So the models that would marry kind of like what you all are doing to what Russ is doing.
Yeah, I think. I
Oh
think
yeah,
there's-
Tony has thoughts probably.
I think the interconnection between those different scales is really critical, and hopefully, like some money can be thrown at it. Tony, how you doing?
Good. Are you? Well, I mean, the connection across scales can be done by embedding the models. For instance, with FDS, which you've been using, you can set up the boundary conditions so that they came from previous simulations or other simulations. So if you do a wharf simulation of, say, a mountain wave passage and a warming downflow or something like that on a fire field, that could be input into a domain that is, well, I mean, technically mesoscale, like mesoscale gamma. So, 2 to 20 kilometers. I think Ruddy showed one yesterday that I did that was a 7 by 5 kilometer domain with terrain. So, that's a way to couple those models just by doing that. And those capabilities, I think, are there in all those models, but you do need the physics. FDS right now, I wouldn't call a meteorological model, but it does contain, it can model Coriolis effect. You can prescribe the Obukov stability if you want for a wind profile, et cetera. So there's some tools there to do that.
Yeah, all of these have kind of trade-offs, right? Some of them, for example, model surface heating from like diurnal surface heating, and others don't. And that can influence that like diurnal pattern. If I light this in the morning versus midday versus the afternoon, how does that change what's happening? And those are cool questions to be thinking about, both as a prescribed burner and also as a fire technician on a wildfire. So I feel like there's really cool opportunities and also some challenges with what we can and can't do with our models right now. This might be kind of a cool place to like think about pulling together a review paper along those lines of like where we're missing pieces.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. This conversation is reminding me of some work that I'm doing with Kevin Hires right now. That's prompted by the use of quickfire to simulate the fire in the Spring Hill fire, which some of you may have seen that talk. And so the idea was to have a library of realistic wind patterns that could be fed into something like quickfire to kind of simulate fire, predict fire behavior under different scenarios. And so I've been using the statistical analyses that have come out from wind energy analyses to develop statistical descriptions of wind patterns at fine scales that will be able to feed into these models. And at any rate, so that's the idea. To be able to have multiple simulations of wind patterns at 1 minute intervals or even finer scale to be able to drive some of these models.
So I guess kind of one of the issues that I see, and Kevin kind of alluded to it a little bit in the chat box also, is how do we move from sort of these like, I don't want to say weed discussions. We're pretty far in the weeds. We can get pretty deep in the weeds as a community. Both of the communities on this meeting can get in the weeds pretty easily. And it's sort of like, how do we build a better interface for land managers, right? So it almost comes to this question of what's good enough and what's ready, to basically be put into that toolbox. But I think there's a huge translational issue between, sort of our perception of what we think is important and what we're interested in investigating for scientific merit, and then translating that through, to the sort of the management, the next like Farsight or the next whatever quick fire iteration, and how we do that. We're just not really set up or designed, to do that as sort of researchers in our, unfortunately, individual silos or our group's individual silos. And I guess I just want to kind of talk about that a little bit, and then also just sort of throw out this idea of credibility to managers and uncertainty in the models, right? So one of the things that we hear in the East, and it's either true or not true, is that, all of our tools for fire have been developed in the West, right? And so they're not going to work in the East. And I won't even get into that conversation, but I hear it all the time from land managers with basically no background or basis in what they're saying, but that's their perception of things. And so these like canonical tests and maybe, how do we simplify the models and look at how they still represent some of the processes and the more complete physics models, but how do we kind of quantify that uncertainty and communicate that also to the managers so that they understand the limitations and the tools that we hopefully will be providing in the future. So anyway, I'm just going to throw that out there and see if anybody has any comments.
Nick,
Yeah,
I'm glad you, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was feeling glad that Nick brought that up, because I know there's some efforts that, I don't even understand the models that Mark Finney and Jason Forthofer are working on. But I know they're moving over to being physics-based. And one day I've been threatening to get into the code, so I really understand everything that's happening there. But we're starting to look toward, and I'm going to be involved in this effort, looking at what fuel models might look like using that model, because they're going to have different parameters, of course, than what we had in the past that include things like the arrangement of fuels. And of course, those models, I think, are, and I don't know enough about all of these models to really say, but I think our aim there is to work at slightly different scales than a lot of the models that have been discussed in Kevin Hires' section, because we're still going to be looking at continental scale of fire simulation for a lot of things. So they're, I know, designed to be faster and more spry. And I know there's some interface between the group that's working on, that was in Kevin's session and Russ's group and that group. But I'm just hearing things discussed that I hadn't been thinking about, like some of these higher atmosphere interactions that I feel like there's really fodder, at least for me to learn. So I was really kind of responding to that comment Nick made about silos and group silos, and feeling, I guess, glad that I'm in on this discussion and have some new things to think about.
I think I also want to make a comment related to the scales, because I'm actually a atmospheric scientist. So basically we study like what's actually going on in atmosphere related to different kind of air pollution. So from fire, we can see a lot of like particulate matter and also the VOCs, and especially that can also contribute to ozone. So that's why we're thinking this connection can be really, really great to support different aspects from the Earth system. And especially I was concerning about the scale problem, because for the atmospheric scale, for now, like my simulation was basically focused on the whole Western US. That's about like 0.25 by 0.3125 degree. So this is a very coarse resolution. However, I was also trying to use like the high resolution fire emission to drive my high resolution model, so which I can use this model with at a maybe 25 meter level resolution. However, for this one, I don't have a very detailed fire emission inventory to drive this model. So I think in the future, if we can have like a tighter connection, that will be really, really helpful.
So to address that and also bring in Nick's comments and the conversation about the weeds too. One of the things I keep going back to, and I've brought this up before, so feel free everyone to tell me to shut up about this, is the way that WRF is set up in the community and the challenge with the infrastructure of maintaining that, right? So there's a research focused end WRF model that contains WRF Fire and a number of other very interesting tools. And then there is a public facing, for forecasting purposes, version of the model that has far less bells and whistles, but has sort of the agreed upon, this is the appropriate packages to be used in these applied spaces. And there are different communities who interact with those different packages. And there's crossover, of course, but I think that's the challenge is, do we really want the scientists doing all of the crossover, or do we need a separate like applied science set of group? You know what I'm talking about, Nick? Like almost like the engineers of our collective thinking or something to like pass that information over in a neat package in a way that the science community as a whole says, yes, we collectively agree this is the approach to take.
And I really, really agree on this, because I think it's very important to have like a review article and then kind of review like all these high resolution, kind of the fire modeling that can simulate different fire metrics. And also for this kind of information, like our atmospheric scientists can know, oh, which one is better for this model and which one is better for the low resolution model. So this is super, super helpful.
Hi, Yang. So I think Yang, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a atmospheric scientist, like that's your bread and butter, right? So I was wondering if you had any sort of insights into these models from that perspective versus from the heavy duty fire perspective.
So in general, like for the atmospheric model, we really rely on different emissions, like the black carbon emissions, organic carbon emissions. And then, so for this kind of emissions, we rely on the documented, the emission factor. And this emission factor is basically kind of measured from the lab experiment. However, to go back to the fire site, that's what we need is the dry matter burned for different plant functional type. So in general, if we have the dry matter burned for different plant functional type, and then we can combine these with emission factors, and then generate the emission rate for different species. And in this case, we can use this emission rate in our chemical transport model, and then to generate the distribution and also the concentration of different things. Like I introduced in my presentation, we can generate the concentration and distribution for black carbon, organic carbon for the whole Western US. And then later, not only the atmospheric scientists can use these kind of results, and the health people can also use these results to combine their like health data, like the Medicare data. And then for this Medicare data, basically they can go to like around county level. And then even though it's not like a very fine resolution, but it's still considered like the relatively high resolution in their field. So this is the connection we need to make. So if we can have like a better like evaluation of different fire models here, and then to provide like a more reasonable emissions to the atmospheric model, and then later the health people can also use our data. So it's kind of like a very clear and also very helpful chain.
And I love how you're referencing scale there, because it totally matters, right? Like which one we need to use for which specific kind of fire atmosphere question we're after.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think the challenge, just like throwing that forward of, okay, how do we go from dreaming about it to making it happen is the infrastructure and funding associated with it. And I don't want to take us into the funding weeds because that's a no fun topic. But maybe that's something to keep in the back of our minds of like, how do we support this as a community, not as like a particular agency or a particular institution, but as a community, and what would it take? Maybe like think about that a little bit too.
I'm going to jump in real quick, even though I'm like double booked. I'm listening to two special sessions simultaneously. I think that funding is available. I mean, if there's really good, if there's a vision for how you can bridge these scales, enable, the suite of really amazing modeling tools and and the power that comes with their integration, whether it's time or space. I think that there really is an appetite for rapid advancement, both within land management agencies and then, at a congressional level. And I'm sort of excited to think, with this group about, what does it take? If I mentioned in the chat, this idea of kind of this advanced fire ecosystem climate modeling concept. I mean, what if there was an interagency capacity to help sustain code so that it doesn't die with a researcher's retirement, or that you're not burdened by having a great idea and not being able to fund it, to get it into, a code that can be loaded onto a federal computer or accessible with by a manager. I mean, y'all have all experienced all these problems. There are no like definitive on-ramps, but there's a lot of money. And so in my time up in DC this year, there is an appetite for a solution and for a dollar figure. And so I'm all ears on this part.
Well, I'm all ears too. Was I interrupting someone?
No, go ahead.
And that was exciting to hear there might be funding, because I think this is a problem that a lot of us are facing, and Russ can vouch that we've been having this discussion around the Fire Lab quite a bit. I think for all of us as researchers, we're supposed to be continually pushing the frontier forward and not spending all of our time supporting the tool or data set that we've just made. And that's what in fact is happening to a lot of us. For example, it's happening to me right now with the tree map data set that Isaac, the statistician that works on it, is often fond of saying, like, we didn't even mean to be here because we just made it with an eye toward calculating risk to carbon from fire. We did not set out to make a tree map, but it was a needed data set to get there. And now it is feeding, some of the work Russ and others are doing. They're using it to populate synthetic forests. But I'm kind of squeezed at the moment because it's just Isaac and I that do this on a fraction of an FTE, and we don't have anyone to support it. And I'm kind of going into detail about mine because I know it's emblematic of what a lot of others are facing. But I think a lot of us feel very stuck. And I really liked Kara's idea. This is kind of what we've been coalescing around too, is could we have a set of engineers or highly trained analysts that can help us, some of the things we as researchers aren't good at, like you probably don't want to see my computer code. It's really inelegant, for example. So cheers to Kara and Kevin.
So, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that this does, I think, is, and that's my perception having rose-colored glasses when thinking about community model and modular approach kind of thing, is it allows for on-ramps from a lot of different voices where they maybe can't get access to bits and pieces of code easily and learn about how things exchange in their own, like basically breaking down silos further. So if you want to run quickfire tied to something else, or take this scheme and add it to that scheme, now you can see what those things do together, how they play together. Whereas right now you really have to go find the expert and tease out, okay, how does this play with this other thing? And let me see if I can sit down and do the math myself about like what that means. And so gaming would help us scientifically as well as it would help in the delivery on the other end. So I would say this is going to be, if possible, it would be a positive for all involved.
This might be a weed, but as far as code availability, that doesn't have to be complex. FDS, for instance, which is maintained by NIST, although Ruddy has a branch that he's been incorporating back into FDS, it's available to anybody at any time. Go to GitHub, they've got a site, all the code is there, instructions for compiling, technical manuals, hundreds of pages of guides on how to use everything, including for wildland fires. and it's freely available, which is really not the case with the other models so far for various reasons, perhaps security or otherwise, but it can be difficult. But I don't understand why it always has to be so difficult, including, models from Missoula or Quickfire or things like this. Being able to examine the code and work with it easily in the community would be a great help. And I don't know why that has to be a very complex thing, or we even need a center to maintain that. Ultimately, we will. I mean, not everybody can have NIST maintain the FDS code, so that's not a fair comparison. But I do like the idea of setting up groups to maintain those codes. And I agree that the scientists, once they're developed, can't always be the ones to maintain them.
Yeah. I appreciate that point for sure, Tony. And I would add to that we all can't be experts on like radiative transfer schemes or which Briggs plume rise bits and pieces are most appropriate, but in some sort of like modular type of approach, you can mess around with those without having to be the expert, right? So like not only is having the code great, but then on top of it, not having to like read through the lines of the code, but being able to like game it out still without knowing, okay, well, that's Rayleigh scattering or whatever is in there, is also really valuable too, because none of us have to get into every single weed to be able to do our work scientifically correctly.
I think I will also add on to this. So for maybe I just use one like atmospheric model as an example. So I think the most widely used models are like well-maintained models, especially if they have like strong like model support team, and then they get more and more users because they found if they meet any problems, they know like where they can find the people to help them. So that's why I kind of like moving forward, and then there are so many more people using this model, and then so many people making contribution to the model, and then this kind of like benefit the whole team, like a whole group. So that's why like I think it's kind of like a healthy thing to kind of support a model to grow and then to support a community.
Y'all, I'm gonna have to pop off. I'm so sorry, but carry the torch and I'll catch on later and see how things go. It was great talking to y'all.
This is when the moderator is supposed to have something clever to say to keep the conversation going, I guess. And I don't think that I really do. So I know, I mean, so again, I feel like I'm Kevin's mouthpiece while he's on his other call there. But, I think, as a PI of one of the fire science exchange networks or groups, like I look at that and I think back to like how much fire science communication has changed just in general over the last 10 years of those exchange networks being there. And really how much more integrated I see a lot of us being with scientists, or with managers, excuse me. I don't think that that's necessarily been the case. And I feel like I was at a CERTIP session yesterday, and it was kind of like the mantra of the whole session was like, oh, this is how we work with managers, and this is how we communicate with managers. And I really don't think that was the case 10 years ago. And so I guess like 10 years from now, sort of, would it be useful for us to implement sort of the same kind of model, right? Like where there's this other group where for the JFSP Science Exchange Networks, we have these professional, like they're basically communicators, right? They're science communication specialists that work for that network. And I just feel like there's this sort of missing step between us and the manager for this like sort of rollout kind of things, or for developing this sort of like model playground, what I see you guys are kind of describing, where the models almost could work like interchangeably, different components and things like that working together, which would be really useful for us as researchers also, right? So how do we go from here to there? What does that look like? The Wi-Fi Commons project has definitely taken some, steps towards doing that thing. But yeah, who's in the chat there? I'm just reading what Justin wrote. But anyway, I guess again, sort of coming back around to that kind of idea of like a modeling center or group of modeling centers that are able to curate and provide the code or the facilities or power to run these models.
Hey, Nick, I do want to jump in part because Jen Stevens is talking about sort of the need for a hub to rapidly advance technology. And the Forest Service chief was quoted as saying, we got to advance this stuff faster than we are, just this past week. And, while we're kind of digesting Justin's, comment here, I mean, to Tony's point, I mean, like sharing code can be the easy part, but making sure that you're not stuck just doing that engineering and that maybe even somebody or a group to help test and look at performance, and then each time that's updated or upgraded, to be able to put it through its paces. If we had kind of that canonical test case scenario or list that would then be published by an independent source. I love the NIST model, and I think that anything that we did like in an interagency sense is going to have to involve NIST, NASA, NOAA. But like funding's coming to do something big, and it can remain fragmented, especially across these scales that y'all of the two special sessions cover. Mechanistic fire modeling for operations, all the way up to sort of it's aggregated and fire regime effects in a rapidly changing climate. I mean, how those things all connect, I think is going to be increasingly important to have a focus on, and one that's really well resourced. So we're not competing against tools, right? It's not one tool to rule them all. It's actually the National Hurricane Model or Center model, where we got that ensemble we're supporting. There's always one in the spaghetti that goes off to hits Bermuda instead of Florida or whatever. And we learn from the differences, as Ruddy was saying yesterday. It's important to have it. And so I'd love to see the power of the collaboration, especially when Alex and I were kind of throwing these two sessions together. I mean, they are intricately and integrally linked, but not necessarily in ways that the fire community is used to thinking about fire behavior modeling in the traditional sense.
I may be repeating myself here, but I really see the need for that, Kevin. Because just for an example, in my world, I'm getting lots of requests for the tree map. People want to know how to use it in forest planning and know if it's appropriate for this application or that application. Sometimes they want to translate it into the forest vegetation simulator so they can do fuel treatment simulations or fire simulations there. And along the lines that Erin's saying here, if people haven't seen her comments about models that are complex, can take a long time to learn and understand, and having people available to help rather than just thousands of pages of documentation would be really important. I really second that, like having a trained cadre of analysts for any number of these things that, in my world, it's just often national forests that are reaching out to me for help and support on these tools, and having a set of trained analysts would be incredibly helpful, I imagine, for all these other fire models that we're talking about too, how you can and can't use the outputs, for example, or to run custom simulations as people are going through their forest planning.
That's kind of how the rest of the world works too. If you have if you know how to drive a car, you can pretty much drive any car, but you don't expect anybody to know how to fix something in the engine. So there's mechanics to do that. So you can just know enough to know the implications of your model and how to do it and run it, but not be expected to change code or alter it in significant ways that are confusing. Yeah. So maybe there's a way to kind of take analogies from other industries on how things work, because the model's just a tool and we're drivers, and then there are people building them and people interpreting it. So
one of the things that I think that policymakers, and I can't speak for policymakers, but that policymakers and agency leadership struggles with is what's it look like? How do if there's a demonstrative need to bridge scales, to enable tools, to resource the programmers and and really the intellectual drivers of innovation, how does it all fit together in a coherent whole? And maybe I think somebody, maybe it was Karen or Kara, that had mentioned, if there's a position paper, of potentially something that could come out. I know, Alex, y'all are doing a special issue out of your session. If there was a position paper that in the vein of some refined research agenda, but maybe refined modeling infrastructure, science infrastructure, there will be money coming out in the next couple of years. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. But helping them scope, the utility, or how to maximize utility of those funds could be a nice outcome of this particular fire circle, or the pair of special sessions on the topics.
I'll volunteer to start taking some notes now from what I can remember. I haven't been doing that. Has anyone been taking any notes? Do we have any volunteers to pick up a torch on that? I'm being very practical here because I think it's a very good idea. I will start taking some notes, but is there anyone that wants to take a lead on something like that?
Well, I think the session is recorded, so that's good. Right?
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I was
you don't
going
have
to
to trust my
mention.
memory.
Yeah, we'll give you guys the recording, and then also the chat will be saved.
Thanks, Annie.
And Karen, this is sort of near and dear to my heart. And I'd hate to set the agenda, but if there was interest, like broad interest, a very, there could be if we pulled together something here, we could also approach Joint Fire Science Program about, a workshop or continuation or funding people's time if they don't have the time, but they have the interest, to maybe pull together this vision, for what do the modelers need? What do you need, right? And what's the future needs, so that we get ahead of it, so we're not being overwhelmed by the wave, but we're on the crest of it.
Great thinking.
So, hi everyone. Kevin knows me. I work for Kevin and also for Louise. So Kevin and I have talked about this a little bit. My background is actually in ecosystem modeling, and Kevin, I'm very happy to hear that they will start funding grants again. So previously I worked on a NASA grant that was 4 years, just fix the model. I feel like we're always rushing to achieve some goal that we wrote in our grant. So I'll partially volunteer to work. I have background in ed, which is global, and Landis too. I'm not that strong in fire. That's you guys, but I think the biggest need is, just funding for us to work on the models, get the documentations up and running, and then be able to pass them off to a user center that was brought up. And I have Louise's dog that just started barking, so I'm running away really quick.
Walking Louise's dog.
Yeah, he's taking care of my dog for a few days. I've got contractors at the house. Yeah, Steve, I'm glad you chimed in. There's a couple things I kind of wanted to just note. First of all, there's if you did catch my talk yesterday, there is a big push for sort of linking ecosystem process models and fire behavior models, and so that's kind of an aspect too that we haven't really talked about yet, is the whole ecology side of things, right? On this sort of full fire circle, right? What does ecology mean in terms of how that influences the fire, and then how does fire actually influence back into the ecosystem, right? So there's that whole sort of component to it also. And the other thing I wanted to, and I also want to reiterate, it really comes down to capacity and organization of that capacity, right? And that's something that, my God, Nick, me, Kevin, Joe O'Brien, all kinds of people, we've been talking about how do we actually organize, something like this. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. You're basically creating, it's almost like you're creating a new agency or something, right? You're creating a new company by doing something like this. And so I definitely think it's amazing, and it's something that you should absolutely do, but it will take a lot of careful organization. In Athens, some of you know that we're pushing for right now, trying to sort of create a hub, here in Athens, Georgia, where we've just recently done like a demonstration close by here at the Hitchley Experimental Forest, where we're kind of like, okay, if we're able to collect X amount of information, can we actually simulate something like quickfire? And again, we can use other models. We can start using the VR approach, like whatever it sort of evolves into over time. But how do we create that organizational structure and capacity if we were to be a hub, right, is kind of the question. And where we would expand out to, I don't know, would we just sort of be, focusing on the Southeast or the East, or would there be like other central hubs where we would all be working together, in some capacity? So I just wanted to kind of throw some of that out there as sort of like a spark for conversation. Oh, another thing, this is no speaking up, is we haven't really talked about like monitoring fire effects that much, but that's kind of another thing that we're really interested in, is sort of being able to monitor our fire effects a little more reliably. And a lot of agencies, or whether it's a national forest or a national park, like whether they're mandated to give some sort of estimation of what their fires are doing on the landscape, and there's different ways of doing that, right? Whether it's from remote sensing or field measurements, but a lot of times they're not remeasured, or they're not measured the same way as they were before. And so there's kind of a push now to kind of create a little bit more of a consistent type of monitoring approach. So I think those two can kind of blend in together also, the sort of fire effects or sort of monitoring, and then also being able to provide models to the fire community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that the things that you're bringing in here, Louise, are really, really important. So between both the monitoring aspect and the modeling aspect, like ecosystem modeling, it gives us a visibility of our, what is the current state of our stuff, and where do we think it's going, and what do we need to do about it? That's where we're really limited right now. Like, you think about it, most of our fire management at present is driven by land fire data, which has an update cycle of 2 to 4 years or whatever, right?
Yep.
And so, we know there were fires that happened that had enormous effects on large parts of the country. We see them show up in the data there years later, right? So in general, we need to move towards a more continuous updating model, okay? Right, where we have all this data that can flow into these things. And this has been a thing we've been talking about as a possible way that fast fuels can be a part of that picture.
Sure.
But these linkages between, leveraging all the resources we can to monitor our current condition. Like, there's so much like multispectral imagery that could be brought in. There's LiDAR data sets. And then, of course, the really fabulous TLS monitoring stuff that you guys have been doing. That's like extraordinary. So like I see this exciting convergence in multiple pathways leading to a more informed concept of what is out there and what's its current state, right? And then linking these models at different scales. If we get, let's imagine pie in the sky, we get, kind of a big picture go ahead from some big funding agency, okay? And they recognize that the environment is in massive flux and we need to totally get on top of what's going on in a way that we haven't been able to do before. We start looking at links between ecosystem processes and meteorology and disturbance, and we start mapping out where, giving ourselves the capacity to not only engage with what we currently have, but envision what are the future scenarios that we need to consider, right? I think all of that can come together. So like, I really do feel like this session of people is such an interesting mix of different disciplines and different scales of observation, and very cross-cutting multidisciplinary set of people. You know, this is as good a session as you could find in terms of people who really are thinking about fire and the environment from different perspectives. And I really think that's what is needed is, you know, something that connects all the dots, and that, you know, we need to be able to make these dots connect in order to envision the increasingly tenuous paths to success in the face of the things we're confronted with. So yeah, the time is now, I say.
Yeah.
So if you are listening right now and you happen to have $100 million or $500 million, you know, just give us a call. We'll figure this out, I say.
Yeah, money talks, right?
So I think what you're kind of getting at, Russ, and I think what we're kind of talking around is it's almost like there needs to be this systematic approach, or this sort of like coordinated approach to doing this kind of thing. And you know, back to this idea of silos, you know, we're all just kind of, I mean, I know what we're doing. We're all chasing our individual research projects, and we're all in these disparate arenas, almost, and definitely competing against each other. A lot of us, right? Like, we all work together, but we definitely compete against each other for funding and things like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like it's kind of the elephant in the room, right? It's like we all do compete against each other at the same time. So it's
and it ends up having these, you know, we're all pushing our individual products and making our own way forward, and you know, in our, you know, at least in the federal service, and I mean in academia also, like, you're rewarded for being super important, right? Like, I'm the most important, and working with others is not necessarily encouraged, right? And I think that having this, well, it is, but you know what I mean, Louise. It doesn't behoove you all the time to do that. And so it's almost like Bob Cremens is a colleague of some of ours, has always said that there's like this need for a Manhattan Project in fire science, and that, you know, but there needs to be leadership, like defined leadership, and how that happens and how that looks, I think, right? So that we come up with like almost like a universal strategy and plan that we're all sort of pulling on. You know, right now, I still see individuals and individual products being pushed forward one way or another, and there's really awesome pieces out there, but we're still missing that connectedness between those efforts. I don't know, you guys can throw more darts at me. At least I didn't say we were in the weeds.
No, I think you and Russ definitely brought all those ideas kind of together. So
Louise, I heard you talking about the question of whether there should be like a single center or distributed regional centers, and you know, looking at something like the NCs and National Center for Ecological Synthesis, and there's just a lot of power in having a single national center, especially when you consider that a lot of the work is going to be distributed. It's going to be occurring virtually anyway. So maybe, like I said, it's just more inspirational to have a national center for something.
Yeah, one of the things that has been brought up in a couple of conversations this summer has been sort of the stretching distance, sort of the accelerating distance between the technology, the modeling capacity, just the complexity of this, you know, of the research world and managers. And so if that distance is constantly expanding, you know, one of the things that I'd like kind of to throw out to the group that's been kind of thrown out, you know, amongst some of the crowd here and people in DC, is the idea of maybe a couple of tiers that are part of a single network. But like, you know, the service center idea maybe that was being discussed with, you know, in the chat with Justin, you know, like there is a demonstrative need for somebody to be able to pick up a phone and say, hey, I'd like a FDF's level set run of this particular fire tomorrow, or, quick fire run. I want a comparison. I want an ensemble of the models to know if I'm going to screw up and burn up houses. There's also a demonstrative need for fire planners to think about what silvicultural action should I take over the next 6 years while I've got $100 million that could produce a desired, resilient climate resilient outcome. And so I think having like that service center is like a bridge between, a high level advanced fire modeling center, interagency type thing that researchers, academics, and sort of software engineers all interface with, versus some of the applied tools. Maybe the higher level or two-rung system, the higher level would also create training and help ensure that regional service centers would be, would have access to the tools. They get the feedback and whatnot. But I wonder if like a two-tiered system's needed to continue to bridge this rapidly expanding gap between what modelers can do and what managers can actually implement or access or understand even sometimes.
Since there's a pause, I'll just do my complaining in person, because I'm hearing talk about like this cadre of analysts, and there's some institutional barriers, at least from the Forest Service side, is what I was complaining about there, in that there's no on-ramp for people who are more from the academic side, who don't have a lot of Pulaski time to become analysts that are sanctioned by this agency. So I went all the way up through the ordained training of S495. But my Nomex is really clean. It has hardly any ash on it. So I've been on some prescribed fires and stuff, but I didn't spend my summers being a firefighter. And there's no way for me to be like ordained as an official analyst or long-term analyst, LTN, the term I'm using there. And I know this is a topic in other circles, but there would be some barriers to allowing some of these analysts who aren't quote unquote LTNs probably to do work on fires, or maybe even prescribed fires. So I just wanted to highlight agency barriers and say there needs to be a way for highly trained analysts on the fire modeling side to actually be allowed to do that work.
Yeah, imagine telling Ruddy and Rod that they're not qualified to run their models.
Yeah, I've kind of I've been told I'm not qualified to run FS Pro, basically. So
I know
it's not one that I wrote, but I work with the people who did.
Well, on the flip side, I know that some of the longer term climate modeling doesn't necessarily come with that sort of training barrier, but there are a lot of NEPA documents and forest plans, integrated natural resource management planning efforts that are relying on really kind of inferior sometimes contract support to write those plans, and there's not, because they don't have, there's no place that they can go to access. I feel like there is an opportunity to get the sort of the advanced research in the hands of managers through this, what is right now just this barrier on the NEPA and the long-term planning side too. It's not the same as what you're saying, Karen, with NWCG and the actual operationalization of, say, the fire tools that our special session was on yesterday. But it is, I think those barriers should be identified in any scoping document, and we just tackle them. But capturing that right now is really important, because it is fascinating to think about what you just typed in there. It's like, yeah, Mark can't run his own model for incident management team. Silly. Yeah, it's just silly. And I think once we have a structure, a scope, a plan, some of those training and implementation pathways become obvious to managers too. But right now they don't really appreciate, I think, fully the value that science is bringing to the firefight or to the fire planning, over the long term, because they just don't access it. Most of them don't come to these conferences, and they have to do it through individual relationships with y'all. I mean, the innovators, and that's less efficient. Changing world. Sorry, that was a soapbox. I'll get off.
Where's the moderator? Nick.
He looks deep in thought.
I guess I'm just trying to figure a way what's the path forward for the rest of this conversation. I really kind of want to hear more from Alex's crew in this. I mean, we kind of feel like we've monopolized this conversation a little bit on the behavior side or the spread side or however we're just defining ourselves. But I don't know. I mean, I almost want to think about how some of our modeling, can tie in better with the ecosystem modeling even, right? Like how can we use, or could we use the quick outputs, to then parameterize an ecosystem process model? How can we work together on something like that? How can we make that a better process?
Well, I can tell you a story. I feel like I'm talking too much though. I can tell you a story about how Alex and John Kim, who's not here but was part of our special session, he's actually presenting right now, how we met, which is that we were having a similar discussion about how to improve the fire module in MC2. And that is why John Kim initially reached out to me. So that's what we embarked on maybe 5 years ago now, Alex. And that's where we sort of meant to be, is looking at how we might marry outputs from something like FSIM, the large fire simulator, to these models that can work over these longer, like climatic and larger physical scales as well. And I would say we've gotten so distracted isn't the right word, so compelled by the need to understand how climate change might affect fire regimes that we haven't really embarked on that. But hopefully with time we will, because from my standpoint, in those process models, a lot of times the fire modules are grossly oversimplified, and for obvious reasons why. That's not the primary output that most of those models are meant to do. But I think there's fodder for really improving a lot of those. There's really some low-hanging fruit there. So I think that's really an important discussion. I wish that John was here, but I guess he's a little busy because he would have a lot, I think, to say on that topic too.
Yeah, he would, but I guess he's currently presenting about that exact topic. So
About that exact, he should be done now. We could even try to message him or something. Looks like he got done 3 minutes ago. But yes, he was just presenting about wildfire plant invasion and future climate change results from wildfire simulation.
Well, I'm just going to throw some stuff out here because I just can't stand awkward silence. So I think one of the key conclusions we've come to as a group here is that we want some money, right? And I think that's actually a pretty easy thing to agree on. Like, hey, give us some money, people, right? So I just want to throw that out there. That is a definitive good thing to arrive at. It's a complicated concept, but I think we've made some progress there. Yeah, actually, I'm just being facetious now. Yeah. Okay, back to you, Nick.
Russ, you're uncomfortable. I like that you're not comfortable with it because I know you'll fill it.
And I think, or Kevin mentioned this earlier as well, but it's Karen Rowley and I and John Kim are editing a special issue on wildfire simulation and climate change in fire ecology. So if there is if someone is wanting to kind of be gung-ho about a review paper on needs and wants and desires and knowledge gaps and where we want to fill it and why and how, maybe that's a sort of a ready-made slot for it.
I think we would love to have it. If anyone wants to go that route, it can be a review article is great, but more time consuming than something that we might call a forum article in fire ecology too, that can be more of almost like an opinion piece or a position paper. So that could be a lot easier and quicker to write, but might not have quite the impact. So I will offer that.
So do we want to try to scope out, some kind of paper from this or some kind of product from this meeting, or how do you guys want to, does anybody have any input on how we might move forward from this session for the next 10 minutes that we have, or 12 minutes?
Well, I mean, I think I really like Alex and Karen's suggestion. So, I mean, that might be just the way to go, right? Is if we want to push forward with a forum piece. I mean, I think all of us in this session and whoever else we want to include could definitely contribute to that. So, and Alex, when are the, have you guys decided on due dates for the special session papers?
Right now it's listed for next summer, I think July of 2022. So,
Okay.
but it's rolling submission now. So, yeah.
And that's if
Okay.
we even put a due date, because I'm sort of the opinion that we just cast a wide
Yeah.
net. So any
Yeah.
deadline wouldn't be strict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes due dates are nice though, right?
Due dates can be nice.
Yeah.
We could make one internally.
Yeah.
To my mind, what we really need is someone who says they would like to be the lead on this. I see Justin saying that he would help, which would be great. And I am reluctant to do that because I know what's happened to, I think I have about 4 different papers sitting on my desk right now that I need to get to. So I feel like if I take the lead, it will founder. So I think having someone take the lead would be great, but we could easily start populating a Google document to do some brainstorming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we probably, yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Is this paper where we make the case for the need for the Manhattan project for wildland fire science?
We certainly could.
I know I was facetious earlier, but I think it is really appropriate, given the stakes and the current trajectory, right? That we put forth a statement with, like, we don't have to get too into the weeds on the details, but a flow chart figure showing the kinds of things that need to start to fit together in order to give us the solution space we need is absolutely critical. And I think that just having a almost conceptual model of what a more coordinated multidisciplinary fire science would look like and what that would deliver would be incredibly valuable. And I think it wouldn't have to be an exhaustive review paper. I think a forum type thing would be a good way to get the point across. I like the idea that Karen was saying we could reuse some of that material in a proposal, But I really do think this is worth doing.
I think it's funny though that everybody's a little hesitant on being the lead.
I was gonna say I could maybe shepherd it along for a little while.
I know. I'm like, I want to be the lead, but do I want to be the lead? Because we're all in the same boat as Karen. Like we've all got all these papers on our desk, right?
Yeah, I think that if Karen, if you'll start, I mean, if one action item would be set up like a shared drive, whether it's Teams, Google Drive, whatever, I don't care. But if we can get started and start jotting down some ideas in a shared space, I'm happy to sort of push forward. What I'd like to also ask is, would participants that are either not on this call but were part of the special sessions, especially on the academic side, will they need funding to participate, materially participate to buy their time and write the papers or sections of it?
Right.
I mean, and if that's the case, we could probably go pretty quickly to JFSP, since they did get a small amount of plus up and will not be spending all of their money on the 2 solicitation topics that came out. We could go quickly to the board and say, hey, give us 2 months of funding for academic partners, and let's see if we can't get this thing rolling as a JFSP product. I mean, that actually is highly likely. This topic has already been thrown before the board as part of kind of their open interest in what's next.
So you're thinking about more of like a white paper rather than.
No,
a
we could,
paper.
I mean, we can publish it any way we want, but you know,
Mm.
one of the interesting audiences here is GAO. They want to know how the investment all leads to some outcomes. And they're about to spend a bunch of money, and they'll be holding agencies' feet to the fire, so to speak, especially with respect to infrastructure and any of the other bills that are pending. And if this helps them get science into the hands of managers, that you know, again, if that's our case, is we're building the science infrastructure to take advanced modeling across these scales, spatial and temporal, climate, ecosystems, fire.
Let me throw out a topic and see if people think this is part of this effort or this is separate, because there's a lot of money coming toward the agencies, right, for fuel treatments. But as it stands right now, at least in the Forest Service, exactly $0 of that is going to R&D to help support managers. So do we want to talk about fuel treatment research here too? I would make the vote that I do think it's related, because, for example, Mark and I are really wanting to look at how we might place fuel treatments and what sort of effects that would have on burn probabilities in fuel treatments and in FSIM. And you can do that by placing them, you know, for example, close to highly valued resources or far away, and seeing how that changes the effect. But right now, I think Mark and I have had a lot of conversations about seeing this amount of funding that's coming toward the land management side, but there's no support in R&D, and we figure we're going to be tapped for that. So I'm just curious if people think that fuel treatment is part of this topic, or we shouldn't muddy the waters.
I think it's clearly part of the solutions that need to be done. So if it's not part of a big picture vision, I don't know how the big picture vision could work, right? Between prescribed fire and fuel treatments, that's how we start to tilt the trajectory more in the right direction. But we need this big picture context from ecosystem process models, more up-to-date monitoring, and interacting things with climate change models, et cetera, to get the guidance of what needs to be done. I mean, obviously, it's not a bad strategy to just go out and start doing stuff, which they're already doing. But the more we can help them get there, particularly in terms of envisioning what the long-term should entail, right? We have there's a big kind of push for just get out there and treat some fuels people, right? But we need to be able to know, like, what are the cumulative impacts of those, you know, effects over the landscape. So yeah, I agree, Karen. I think the fuel treatments is a critical component of a plan, because it's one of the actionable items that can be done, you know. So that's my 2 cents, which in today's economy is only worth $1, a penny and a half.
Well, thank you, Russ. And I will, I just got a direct message from someone saying that they agree that the field needs help to know where treatments need to be and how effective those might be. So another vote that, yeah, fuel treatment would be important here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be included. Should we plan to meet again in the next couple months, or January? Or I know there's a lot of stuff going on, at least for a lot of you people, for some spring fires and stuff like that, but including myself.
I think that if we had a shared document, we can just, if folks want to opt in and help scope this out, then, you know, they can invite, you know, other collaborators in that may be interested. Then we can use that list in the shared document to maybe go ahead and schedule a follow-up meeting. Alex, Nick, does that sound okay with you?
Yep, that sounds good. I'm just trying to think of how we could capture everybody's information real quick. Can everybody maybe put, if you're interested in this, put your email in the chat, just so we can kind of confirm and add you to the list if you want to be. That's probably the best way to do it quickly. I was going to try to make a doc real fast, but that time probably passed.
Yeah, we also want to make sure we include the people that are not on right now, those people that left early. Right?
Yeah, good point, Louise. And even people who weren't on at all, maybe we extend the invitation from these 2 sessions.
Yeah, and then maybe that's the way to go too, is just to make sure that we at least include the presenters to start, you know, as a part of the cadre.
I think when we have the recording, as long as the person had their name there, we'll be able to see at least who joined this. So that could be helpful. And
Okay.
let us know how we can support you guys moving forward. You know, definitely provide the recording in the chat for you. But if there's other things Afi can do logistically to help you, let me know.
Okay, thanks, Annie.
This is a list of emails that you're putting together, Nick. So,
Yeah, just
Okay.
in the chat box for right now.
all
If
right,
you want
so
to put
then
other folks in there too, that's fine. Just
I can get you
preliminarily.
the session for our session presenters. I can get you that list
Yeah.
at least. So
Yeah, Rod and Ruddy both, I've talked to both of them about this idea, at least with respect to some of the fire behavior modeling, and they're in. Exactly what this looks like in a combined sense, I think, is really kind of exciting to me, Alex. You know, really thinking this as an advanced fire ecosystem climate kind of venture that is, I think, is probably going to be the winner of the model, but I don't know what the technical hurdles are to get into that point, but I think it is a strategic endpoint that we need.
All right, we're coming up on the end of this session. Does anybody have any last words or any parting thoughts? Well, good. I thought it was really good.
Excited.
Yeah,
Yep.
good conversation today, and I'm happy that we came full circle and kind of. I like when these things have like something that comes out of them. So I'm excited to work on something out of the session for sure. So it was really great. I appreciate everybody participating, and thank you, Annie, as always.
Yeah, you're
Thanks,
welcome.
Nick.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. And Nick, thanks for putting up with me, man. You did a great job moderating.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of the day.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.